Well, welcome back. I hope you agree with me that was a fantastic sessions 1 and 2. Fantastic start. Owen would have been proud, no doubt. So we're going to now spend the next sort of half an hour, 40 minutes on questions, conversation and discussion. I think it's fair to say that a lot of the comments and questions are around the big theme of today, which is community wealth building. So I'd like to spend a significant amount of time putting that question to our speakers, and then to our panel, and then if there might be an opportunity for others to contribute should they wish, if we have the time. But I would like to begin with a question that was raised way back, which was posed to our, if you like, our first panel. There were two related pieces, and I just think it's quite interesting. One was a question from Jackie Jones, and this was about Chris's presentation, which was a straightforward question: who issued the Labour notes? But I think more broadly, and this is very interesting when we think about alternative systems of currency and in the light of cryptocurrencies and all the rest of it, is that Graham Brand asked, I think a 21st century model of Owen's Labour notes would be a digital mutual credit scheme for cooperators and communities. Do others have any thoughts on this? Those questions are in the chat, and I just wondered if any of our contributors from the first session, Liz, Chris or Gillian, might like to respond to either of those questions.
Thanks, Cilla. I can respond to the first one. I did put an answer in the chat, but my understanding is that the labour exchanges themselves issued those notes. I'm not sure anybody else would have had the responsibility for doing that.
All right, thanks, Chris. I didn't see that. Apologies.
No problem.
But what about the second question? This idea of how we can translate that model to the 21st century.
I'm going to refer that one to Gillian and Liz.
Right. Hello, Gillian and Liz. Are you there?
Hi. Yeah. Okay. I think my sort of take on it is it's just as applicable now to when the exchanges were in operation, and when and why they failed. It's that idea that there can be, if you like, winners and losers in a new form of transfer of assets or wealth, to use as currency. So the cryptocurrency stuff is that people hear that individuals have benefited or have, which is completely contrary to the Owen model, become wealthy in a very short time based on doing very little through crypto investment, through Bitcoin. And there's actually so much risk associated because there's no regulation of any kind. There's no securities against that investment, and that it's very, very subject to loss, not just because of sort of traditional markets, but because of how many investors you can get as an investor. You only sort of are able to mine Bitcoin effectively if you have a huge technical and investor platform yourself. And most people don't make anything. Most people lose an enormous amount of money due to those issues. So there's a huge kind of risk associated with the wider population in that as an exchange of currency. That was probably the same take for labour exchange notes, that there's not enough different levels in the market of people using them to make them a sustainable alternative to cash. And this is a cash society, not our society, Owen's society, is a cash and land assets based society. So it's too radical almost, and so few people in so few trades are able to make use of it quickly to sort of secure their investments. And that's the same with cryptocurrency. That's what we're looking at now, that it's very unequal.
Thanks, Liz.
Platform.
Thank you. I noticed that Graham has got his hand up, and if he can make a very short comment, that would be great. But just before I come to you, Graham, Gillian, did you have anything to add to that?
I have no knowledge of cryptocurrencies and things. It just blows my mind. So I have no real idea. But one of the things that I have always respected about credit unions is that part of what they do is not just supplying money and making money available, but it's actually teaching people about money, how to handle it, budgeting and all that sort of stuff. And I think that really is what we need in an awful lot of these things.
Thank you, Gillian. Really great point. There have been some other comments around LETS schemes. Are they the modern day equivalent of Owen's Labour Note schemes? And then something else about Catherine Whitwell, that we might want to put an answer to that in the chat. But Graham, can I over to you very briefly, please? Okay, thanks. I raised the original question. Liz was talking mostly about cryptocurrencies. I was not talking about cryptocurrencies at all. They're a very different model from mutual credit. Cryptocurrencies are designed for speculation. They're just an extension of capitalism. What we need is a system of money creation similar to mutual credit. I know my colleague John is much more knowledgeable on different models of mutual credit. But an essential question, I think, on community wealth building is, what is money? It's not a commodity, it's just a means of measuring the flow through the economy. And we need a currency model that reflects that. Not the present capitalist system pretends that money is a commodity that can be bought and sold and is actually owned by individuals. We need a money model that's based on reality, that money is just a means of measuring economic transactions. It's not a means, an end in itself, and it should not be speculated on. Thank you very much indeed, Graham. That's a very helpful distinction you've made. John, I'll come to you later if you've got time, but forgive me for moving on quickly. I know you've made a very helpful observation in the chat.
Around the Scale Committee of Ethics.
Sorry,
Session 3 was done by Robin reduces the working. How can we get another unkind student there?
Sorry, who was that from?
I think that was from Terry, but I think he was just reading out the schedule. Sorry, I've just moved it in for a second.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll return it if we can. But I hope that's been a helpful series of responses to that sort of very important part of rethinking what we mean by the commodity of money, about wealth, and the incredible thinking that Owen was doing way back in the 1820s and 1830s about trying to address that issue. And if I may, I'd like to pass on, and hopefully, we can return to these questions more broadly if we're able, to go back to the sort of substantive part of this this session now, really, in the light of the title, the notion of community wealth building. And I think our speakers have already identified, signalled what some of the key issues are in a Welsh context, but certainly not in a Welsh context alone, which is the sort of barriers to scalability, how you actually progress such ideas and make them tangible and workable across communities, and how you actually engage those communities in notions of community wealth building. I'm wondering if we could talk about the barrier piece, given the fact that Julie was just sort of raised it. If you don't mind me putting you on the spot, Julie, that was clearly of key concern to you. It's something you felt would be helpful for other members of the panel and participants to think about. Could you just say in a few words again, why you felt that was such a key concern in your experience?
Yeah, so our experience is that we fund an enormous range of cooperative and community interest initiatives, I suppose, across Wales, but they're scattergunned, and I think it was Neil, wasn't it, who was really making the point that scattergun approach isn't really what we need. Is a much more consistent approach, and frankly, we've absolutely struggled to do that. We've absolutely struggled to get civic society engaged right across Wales in that. So we have pockets. When Michael spoke a lot about the pocket he's in, he doesn't mind me characterising it like that, but trying to duplicate that pocket across other parts of Wales in different circumstances has proved a really intractable barrier for us. So, we think we've worked very hard as a government to try and lower some of the barriers, and no doubt there are others that can be lowered too. But the response to that has not been as we would like it to be. And I suppose I want to ask for advice from all the cooperatives present, because we all agree here in this group what we're trying to achieve. How can I, how else can we get that message out? How else can I support cooperative communities across Wales to come together to access some of the things that we already could provide, but it's proving quite intractable. And three things I'd say in particular: the community energy piece, particularly the stuff that Michael talked about electric car clubs and charging points. We've been trying to push that for quite some time. We've been building housing that has that integrated in it, that by the community, buy their energy communally, store it communally, use it communally, and so on. But it's hard to scale it out. So that one, the community energy companies themselves getting access to finance for people to buy into that, and actually the enthusiasm to do it. And actually the third one, which nobody's mentioned here today, which is a massive issue in Wales, is retrofitting people's homes so that they're much less carbon emitting, but actually much more energy efficient. And we've got a big problem with fuel poverty, particularly given the current cost of living crisis. And nobody's mentioned that one, but bringing communities together to do that will be absolutely essential, or nobody will be able to afford it. So yeah, those are the kind of practical day-to-day things we wrestle with. But I was looking for some advice about how on earth to spread that out.
Thank you, Julie. I think it's a great idea if we go over to broadly to participants on the call to respond to some of those questions you've posed. But in the first instance, and quite sort of straightforwardly and quickly, I wonder if our two other participants from session 2, Neil and Michael, might like to offer their short observations on how you might Neil gave us some great examples of where this has been done, as has how that engagement has taken place, and ditto Michael. I wonder if you could just share a bit of some sort of quickish responses to Julie's question, and begin with you, maybe Neil, if that's okay. Sorry, just
yeah, no, it's a great problem of our time, really. And just very quickly, is we have to recognise that the tentacles of corporate capitalism has penetrated our society, our economy, and our state. Even though we think we know it's there, it's all around us, and that's a huge issue. And so it's not just the state in terms of policy and programs. We need to think about something that's much more systematic. And I'm interested in the process of governance and the process of change. And in that, I think we need to be very ordered, and that's why I quite like the pillars that are ordered. But say, for instance, let's talk about procurement. It's not just about getting a local supplier. That's like the minimalist thing. How are we actually thinking about using our public spending to directly change the economy and the democratization of the economy? That's where it comes to supply. So in each of the axes that I've been talking about, these pillars, you need to try and stretch it to the max. For instance, look at community, land transfer to communities. That's quite good, yeah, great. But what you want to think about then is, well, okay, so there's energy production on that land. Then what are the financial vehicles that support the harnessing of that wealth? How then is that wealth reinvested in new and imaginative ways to democratize the economy? I think in public policy, we wrestle it in all nations. In public policy, we've got initiatives, we've got programs, but I think we need to see these as like starting points, catalysts to much deepening and strengthening. And that's how the pillars, and a very rigorous pillar approach that systematically goes from a small thing that actually starts to amplify and scale those things up. And finally, Roberto Unger is a Brazilian philosopher and politician. He says we're in the age of experiments, epiphanies of possibilities. And the key thing is to scale them. So we need to scale these things. And that's what I say to any public policy maker. What good stuff are you doing? And how are you really going to scale it? Let's work that system. And I think a lot of us, because, we tend to think, oh, there's a good regeneration scheme that will do. It's not systemic enough. It's not scaling. It's not deepening its roots, if you like, in creating a more democratic economy.
Thank you very much indeed, Neil. I think that's really helpful. Michael, have you got a quick response to Julie?
Yeah, I completely empathise with the point she's making, and I guess we just have to recognise that the capitalist model has had 100 years of evolution, to get to the point where we are at now, and we're trying to catch up and overtake within a very, very short space of time. I think speaking from within Wales, and I'm sure it's the same everywhere, the frontline workers are in a sense entrepreneurs. These are the successful kind of, drivers for change. But by definition, entrepreneurs tend to be individualistic, very sort of focused on the task that they're trying to achieve. And I think the environment from within which we've kind of grown out of, which is often the voluntary sector, is highly competitive in terms of access to often what the startup funding is, which is grant funding. And so there's a lot of protectionism, in the background as well. And I think, within that context, we have to understand that it's quite, there's something else we need to add in. And I think David and myself, we've been talking a lot about trying to, recognizing education is really important. And I think this is also critical for a lot of these frontline workers. We need to go back to school, and we need to be given time out and some resources to do that, to actually educate ourselves. Graham touched on a really, really important point about what is money. We all need to understand what money is and how we actually harness that in a completely different way, to rethink what it's about, so it becomes a servant of what we're trying to do on the front line, rather than we're always chasing capital through the through the conventional routes.
Thank you, Michael. That's so important. And obviously, as a cooperative and adult educator, to me, if we don't get the education right of this, whether it be how we lead cooperatives, how we engage in cooperatives, how we communicate with each other within cooperatives, how we make it all work, then we won't get there, because it's that cultural shift, I suspect, in the cooperative organisation, that even if people are extremely well-meaning, how do you, as Neil said, how you make that culture thick and deep, so that it's really rich, and that is just the way you do things. I'm going to open up to a couple of comments, please, if I may. There are lots of questions in the chat. Please forgive me if we don't get to them all. I'm sure we'll all have a stab at answering them after the event. But I would like to pass over to Glenn Bowen, because you've asked a couple of questions in the chat. Glenn, very happy for you to make a short question, please. And if it's aimed at one of the speakers, just mention them. I'm sure they'll be happy with that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Cilla, and thanks, everyone. It's been a great day. And just a little bit of a reflection on what the Minister said in terms of the difficulty and the challenges in engaging people. We can't force people to cooperate, but we can educate. And from school level about self-help and how communities come together, we can start at that very early level. Where there is a will for people to cooperate, we can get in there and work with them, and we do it. And there's some brilliant local examples, as we've all said. We need to scale those up. The question that I put on there is, where we haven't got that local action, how can we use anchor institutions in the same way they did in Cleveland to support and enable the development of something and hand it over to the stakeholders? So if we can't do the bottom-up grassroots approach, which is the best way to do it as cooperators, could we as Compass work with a council and social services department to set up a social care business, but from day one you recruit workers who are keen to take over that business, and we hand it over and we leave legacy. So my question was, how do we get anchor institutions to work work harder to create economic value. And just a little one for the Minister. We've spoken a lot as Compass, Wales Co-op Centre, Compass now to the health boards about how they could set up trading arms to create economic value. But we need legislative change to make that happen by all accounts, because the trusts can set up trading arms, but the health boards can't. So that was the one question. How can we get our anchor institutions to work harder to create value, jobs and quality? Thanks, Cilla. Thanks, Minister.
Thank you, Glenn. That was a very long question.
Sorry.
I'm wondering, Julie, if you'd like me to put that to Neil, given the fact that he talked about engaging anchor institutions as a critical part of community wealth building, or whether you'd like to answer that element yourself.
No, I think Neil would be far better placed than I am to do it. I'm asking the question still. Can I just make one point though, Cilla? There's another thread going on, and a horrible feeling we're going to run out of time, just on education. And I know you've got another session coming up in July. Yeah. But just to say, with the new curriculum rollout in Wales, there's a real opportunity to put materials onto Hub so that teachers can easily access them and spread them out. And one of the real great opportunities in Wales, I don't want the cooperative movement to miss out on, is providing that information. So that we can get that onto Hub and teachers can just pick it up as part of their rollout of the new curriculum. I know you've got a session in July, but I'd much prefer Neil to answer the question that Glenn just put, because really frankly, if I knew the answer, I'd be doing it already.
No, thank you so much, Julie. That's because there was a lot of questions about that in the chat. So thank you for answering that. Neil, putting you on the spot, would you be able to address that for us? Have a go.
I think what Glenn's question vis-a-vis how do you ensure that anchor organisations are true economic agents of change and how they can actually help themselves to democratise the economy is a problem the world over. I think probably Wales and Scotland are similar in that. I think what's key here is to identify how we encourage, if not legislate, as Glenn outlined, anchor organisations to be able to do as much as they can as economic agents. And you have your public service boards. I think you've got community planning partnerships. Scotland's got its community planning partnerships, which I think it's fair to say they're maybe more of a talking shop rather than intentional reshaping of the economy and services. I think there is talk in the Scottish Government how we need to think about the CPPs and how individual anchor organisations in these CPPs, which includes health boards, fire service, police, colleges, universities, how we enable them to actually be more economic agents to shape the kind of things that Glenn's talking about. Because they create a lot of demand, but they're relying on the existing supply. And that existing supply in small countries like Scotland and Wales tends to be larger players. And so we need to democratise supply, and that is a role of public spending and those anchor organisations to affect change within that supply. And they've not got enough power at their elbow at the moment, and it could be legislation. Though there is a warning in that. I would say, let's explore exactly what they can do within existing powers before you start jumping down a legislative route. I think there's a lot of practice, mistaken ideas about legislation, risk aversion that's there, rather than perhaps any particular legislative barrier.
Thank you very much indeed, Neil. I hope that was helpful, Glenn and Julie. There are a lot of questions and comments about currency. There have been some clarifications from Liz, who responded earlier, and others. So I suggest, David and colleagues, that you need a whole session on this at some stage, because it's a very long and rich stream. But I have also got Jim McKenzie with his hand up. Jim, would you like to either make an observation in answer to Julie or ask a question of any speakers?
Okay, thanks. I'd like to ask a question. We know that Robert Owen, in fact, reduced the working day for the workers to 8 hours. Now, if we bring it up to the present time, a lot of unions are campaigning for a 4-day week with no loss of pay. And that would be a tremendous benefit to people, because it would give them more time and opportunity either to look after children or to care for the elderly, or indeed to study, or indeed set up new co-ops. So I just wonder here what the panel would like to see, how the panel could push this forward so that we actually do achieve a 4-day working week. I know in the Scottish Government have given about £10 million, I believe, for pilots. And I think there's something similar in Wales, but obviously, you know, that's just, you know, peanuts to the whole economy. Just to put that, if we want to improve people's life, improve people's health, it's the workers that would be tremendously beneficial for that, and how that can be moved up the agenda and implemented in a phased manner, so it's economically viable and sustainable, and it you know brings benefits to the whole of society and health-wise and others. I'd just like to see how the panel would you know, tackle that and move that forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Jim. I'll ask anyone from any of the sessions if they'd like to answer that. I think there's a very good response there from Sarah Birch in the chat, which is obviously any reasonable person would spend their day off setting up co-ops. Maybe yes, maybe not. I don't know. But that's fantastic. Thank you. Who would you like? Maybe Julie would like to respond there, and then any of the other panel members from any of the sessions might want to say something else on that. Julie.
Yeah, sure. So I was just putting in the chat there that one of the frustrations for us is that employment law is not devolved to Wales as it is in Scotland. So a number of the levers that we would like to have in order to enable some of this just don't exist in Wales. We are, though, about to put a Fair Work and Public Procurement Act onto the statute book in Wales, and the whole point of that is to drive some of this into the public sector, including some of the health board stuff we just talked about, and also we have an economic contract with all private sector firms that receive Welsh Government funding, and because of the structure of the Welsh economy, that's pretty much 100% of them, which is an interesting lever for us. So and also we're putting the new community bank in place that Michael spoke about earlier, and the combination of those we hope will provide access to finance and incentives for workers to do various things, both in startups for supply chains to the big public organizations, and also in buyouts or better worker representation. We also are refusing to fund anybody who hasn't got a trade union recognised in their workplace, which has been highly controversial, I have to say, and we'll almost certainly get taken to court by the UK government over whether we have the power to do that or not. But it'll be interesting times ahead. So we're looking for any help that people want to give me. I say this in everything I talk at, and you'd be amazed how little it's taken up, but I'm easily reachable on email. I'm julie.james@gov.wales. I'm always really happy to hear from people who've got good ideas in this space, including things like how do I persuade people that they'd like to set up a co-op on Saturday, and the whole issue about access to land, which is a major issue in Wales, is front and center of that, because that on access to land, a lot of this whole agenda is based on whether or not you have access to the land that you need to do all of the various things that we've just discussed. So
thank you very much.
Through.
Sorry, Julie, I didn't mean to interrupt. No, thank you so much for that, and great to hear about the courage of conviction around trade unions in the workplace. You know you're doing the right thing, even though it might be challenged. But thank you for that. Neil has his hand up as well. Neil, would you like to respond to that question?
Yeah, no, I completely support that 4-day week agenda, Jim, and thanks for bringing it up. And I think just to challenge us all, you know, we're all progressive stakeholders here, yeah, and it goes back to my earlier point. We need to be systematic, ordered, and sequential with the attention to address the type of capitalism we have and the climate emergency that it creates. And so it's important that when these things come up, let's know that's a great progressive idea, and it is a great progressive idea, but let's get sequential and systematic about it. The real issue here is ownership in the economy and shareholder supremacy. Yeah, the sub-issue, in my view, is the issue around work. We need to get more of everyone, all Welsh people, all Scottish people, have more stake directly in the economy before shareholders disappear it and take it away into the Cayman Islands. Yeah, so ownership is first. And I think these questions about policy calibration are fundamentally important. 4-day week, what a great idea, let's do it. Well, without changing the ownership structure, yeah, without looking at shareholder supremacy, what's going to happen to the 4-day week? It's going to get squeezed, and the lobbyists will be there and it'll get weakened and weakened. So we need to think deeply as progressives in this space, with Robert Owen, who was in that sort of systematic thinker, to think, what is the sequence we need to work at here? And so I think we need to think 4D, yes, but is that the first thing we do? Or do we start to consider ownership into questions of sectorial supremacy as a starting point? Or we run both simultaneously, but we can't have this episodic progressive policy that doesn't actually turn the dial and affect the real issue here in terms of the workings of the capitalist model and how it screws us all up and the planet.
Thank you so much, Neil. And I would do the one plug I'm going to make, which is, of course, the Union Co-op conference that we're running at Wortley Hall a week today, which is the workers' stately home, if you haven't visited it, near Barnsley. And that is very much about what the fundamental thing in that conversation is about: ownership and control. Maybe that's what it's always been. But thank you so much, Neil. Michael, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just in answer to that question, I mean, it's a really good one. And I think, you know, some of my best work and most exciting work and what really inspires me is not the day off, it's not the Saturday or the Sunday, but it's the time I can steal out of frontline work when I'm then networking with colleagues. And I think, you know, maybe as almost like a halfway, the fourth day or the fifth day of work, maybe there could be a way in which Julie's department funds the rest of us who are in this frontline work to have a day where we are able to actually meet instead of trying to steal small amounts of time to solve this problem of how do we join together, how do we join things up, how do we get this more structured, holistic overview and create a much better strategy in terms of moving forward. We can call it an education day, a workers' education day, whatever. But if somehow we were released out of the frontline work, I think that would be really valuable.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael. That is a very valuable comment in itself. Thank you. There are lots of comments in the chat, and I'm hoping that we'll save the chat, David, and share that out with others, because it's, you know, it really is worth looking at. I'm not sure, Julie, if we have answered the question you posed, or and as indeed have others, around scalability and engagement. My view would be what we have done is reminded ourselves that they are top of our, you know, challenges, and as long as we're aware of those, because we're not resting easy with what we do achieve, then we can keep working on them and keep thinking about them. And I think David put a very good point before, you know, which is what we all know, is that those of us who've been around different movements for a long time, we are talking about movement building, and we are talking about you know, to having to embed things, and that takes time. It doesn't mean we've got that much time, actually, with climate emergency, in my view, but, you know, there are, and with the massive inequalities that we're seeing deepening, but we have to keep thinking about how we make these things scalable, how we make these things so that people actually want to be cooperators, so that they want to be in alternative models. And it's got to be attractive, and it's got to be great. And I know George Orwell's a bit of a controversial figure, but he always did say you've got to make socialism look like you want to be one, you know, and not just like it's a penance. So I would say that. We're very near to end, and I'm going to be handing over to Chris Hall. John has had his hand up. John, can you make a very quick comment, John Waters? And it would need to be very quick if that's possible, please.
Excuse me. Yes, it'll have to be brief because there are so many things I'd like to say. I think a lot of the problem comes in terms of scalability and coordination because we don't share a common understanding of the terms we use. And there's no way we ever can. We all have a different understanding of the terms we use in context. We have to be prepared to provide references and anchors to make clear what it is we're talking about. Otherwise, we end up talking across purposes. And just one example here is the use of the term currency. I don't want to go into details about that because it'll take me hours, but I'm just raising this issue. There's also a limit to what the human mind can cope with in terms of complexity, or to use a cybernetic term, variety. Variety management is fundamental. And if you're going to deal with scalability, you have to be prepared to separate modalities of thinking and develop coherence within what cyberneticians would call a recursive dimension. It really is the only way to achieve it. So people need to understand this a lot more. Otherwise, with the best of intentions, they will be struggling to do to achieve things that they're doomed to fail at. And I believe these things can be achieved as long as people are much better armed. Okay, I'm going to shut up now.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. And it's one of those key cooperative values. It's about openness, isn't it? You know, it's about being a critical thinker, reflective, and being open, and reminding ourselves that we all have these different understandings of things and experiences of things. So thank you very much. As a really, really valuable point on which to finish. And if I may, you asked a great question, Chris Hall. Sadly, we didn't get to it. But as an organiser, you've just got to forget those niceties and put it to one side. And may I hand over to you? And thank you very much, everyone, for participating. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Cilla. Brilliant facilitator, as always. Everyone, I'm the chair of COPS Mutual Wales. Massive thanks to David Smith for setting this event up. We will be putting parts of this event on our YouTube channel. David will possibly put, or someone will put the link into the chat. We have a second event. If you enjoyed this, the second event will be taking place on International Co-operators Day, the 2nd of July. Chris Williams will be doing a further extensive lecture all about Robert Owen and other angles, so cooperation generally. Cilla started us off with the absolute thought about Ukraine, and our good colleague of Julie James, Mick Antoniou, has got a crowdfunder for medical care in Ukraine. His target was 5,000. He's reached 43,000. But if anyone wants to make a contribution, and again, I think we can put the link into the chat. And all these ideas that we have, I mean, it's been absolutely brilliant today. I love Michael Brown's idea of a Workers' Education Day. That's absolutely right. That is such a brilliant idea. 4-day working week, what a great thought for us to bear in mind. I lob in the Macora law, which is to empower the workers to buy the businesses from the bosses when the opportunity arises. David Smith referring to movement building. So this Rome isn't going to be built in a day, folks. So we've got to take it from where it is. And I say Rome, and I think Eurovision, that's on tonight. And it started in 1956, Eurovision, and look at it now. And so I think, and everyone votes in Eurovision, so there's a bit of democracy. I'm not sure about the democracy, but we all want to think about the democracy of democratization of these things. So closing it at midday in a few seconds. Thank you ever so much. I think it's a great way to spend a Saturday morning. Come and join us for another one of the events. Costs nothing, but cooperation will take over the world in due course. Thank you. Goodbye.